A sincere thank you to each of you for helping make the work that we do here and around the country possible. Now, to tell us a little bit more about the USGLC's work here in the region and around the country, I'd like to welcome Nizar Jamal, USGLC's Director of Outreach for the Heartland region.
All right, thank you, Kylie. Really appreciate that. And it's really wonderful to be here today in North Dakota. It's my first time being in this wonderful state. Spent a lot of time over in Minnesota, but I guess it's a lot nicer over here, so maybe I'll stick around for a while. And yeah, you guys can clap to that. Don't tell my Minnesotans in the room. But it's really great to be here with our panel, Congressman Armstrong, Governor Schaefer, and General Fay for being here with us today. And it's really great that North Dakota has leaders both here in the state and in Washington, D.C. who understand why it's so important for America to be engaged around the world. I want to thank you all for taking the time this morning. I know folks drove from Bismarck, the western part of the state as well, just to be here with us. Folks came from Minnesota as well, so really do appreciate it. And I want to give a special thank you to our bipartisan North Dakota Advisory Committee, which is chaired by Congressman Earl Pomeroy and, of course, the one and only former Governor Ed Schaefer, who we have with us here today. So this is your first time with us, or maybe you're an old friend, just as a refresher, to talk about who we are as an organization. USGLC is a diverse network of over 500 different businesses, NGOs, faith organizations, and groups that come together on a really simple mission, is that America should be engaged around the world. We have a network that spans from coast to coast, from Arizona to Maine, and from Washington State to Florida, and right here in North Dakota as well. We also have a program that's particularly near and dear to my heart, which is called Farmers for Prosperity, which we launched last year, which is over 200 farmers and folks working in agriculture to know that harnessing America's power in our agricultural space is important to feed the world. At the national level, we're advised by our National Advisory Council, which is almost every single living former Secretary of State, former cabinet officials, and foreign policy folks from across the country. And as Kylie alluded to earlier, we're also really proud to have the support of the military community and who understand, having served in uniform and in conflict zones around the world, the importance of when America shows up. We have a National Security Advisory Council, which is co-chaired by Admiral James Stavridis and General Anthony Zinni, which is over 250 former 3- and 4-star generals and admirals. We also have 30,000 veterans for smart power across the country, and we're really honored to have the support of folks who have served in uniform. But there's a broad coalition. It's a lot of different people that normally aren't in the same room together. So what drives us to be together is this really simple belief that America's diplomacy and development programs protect our national security, advance our economic interests, and project the very best of who it is to be an American. That's why we talk about the international affairs budget, which is the main scope of our work. It's less than 1% of the federal budget, and it's one of the most cost-effective investments that America makes. It's why we've been working across the country for the past few years to ask folks, foreign aid, what's it worth? And folks have said it's worth quite a lot. We've asked folks here in North Dakota, we've asked them in all 50 states. But just as a little statistic for you all, of America's 15 largest trading partners today, 11 are former recipients of American assistance. So when we make a long-term investment, we don't just look to tomorrow, we look for 50, 100 years from now. This is crucially important to our economy, especially in a state like North Dakota, which exported $5 billion worth of goods last year, and over 1 in 5 jobs in this state are supported by trade. Now, with all the fun statistics out of the way, we can have a good time here today, and I want to welcome to the stage the wonderful Drew Combs from North Dakota Trade.
Good morning. My name is Drew Combs, the Executive Director of the North Dakota Trade Office. It's an honor to be here today on behalf of the small and large businesses dotted throughout North Dakota. It is a special honor as a veteran and an international relations professional to be asked to introduce our distinguished panelists. North Dakota businesses, like all businesses throughout the American heartland, understand that the local economies rise and fall with the economic currents of the world. 1 in 5 American jobs are tied to international trade. 1/3 of all manufacturing jobs in the U.S. are directly tied to our exports. To add a little bit of North Dakota flavor to that, North Dakota in 2021 exported $8.2 billion worth of goods and services to over 181 different countries. It may be surprising to note that our humble and often forgotten state ranks 9th in agriculture exports. And it's also important to remember that most people who buy American goods do not live in the United States. Many of those of our customers are in emerging markets, which happens to be the fastest growing markets in the world. As mentioned, 11 of America's top 15 trading partners were once recipients of foreign aid. And I want to add a little bit more food for thought on that. So in the past 80 years, out of that 15, we were in direct military conflict with 3 of those, and we were in a long-term intervention in 2 more of those. So making friends and partners is not always easy, but it's vital that we keep our international affairs budget funded. I know from experience that the private sector alone cannot keep us competitive in the growing marketplace. That is why we rely on these critical strategic investments in diplomacy and development to help fight corruption, promote the rule of law, and open new markets for our goods and services, which is a key to our economic prosperity right here at home. So whether you joined us today from the business, military, humanitarian, or academic communities, these issues impact all of us. Now I would like you to join me in welcoming today's panel. Lieutenant General Timothy Fay served in the U.S. Air Force for over 30 years in locations around the world, including Iraq, Portugal, Argentina. He served in Operations Desert Storm, Allied Force, and Iraqi Freedom. He commanded at the squadron level, group, and wing levels, and is a command pilot with nearly 4,000 flight hours. Prior to his retirement, General Fay served in the Pentagon as the Director of Staff for the Air Force. Governor Schaefer served as North Dakota's governor from 1992 until 2000, and then as the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture under George W. Bush from 2008 to 2009. Born and raised in Bismarck, he made diversifying and expanding North Dakota's economy a priority, reducing the cost of government, and expanded North Dakota's communication infrastructure by making high-speed internet available to farmers, ranchers, and rural businesses across the state. We're truly honored to have him with us today. We also welcome back USGLC's Nizar Jamal to the stage to moderate the discussion. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Congressman Kelly Armstrong, a dedicated public servant who represents North Dakota's at-large district. Congressman Armstrong serves on a number of prestigious committees, including the Vice Chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee. He also sits on the Oversight and the Accountability Committee, including its subcommittee on national security, the border, and foreign affairs. Before his career in government, Congressman Armstrong practiced law while serving as a volunteer firefighter for the Dickinson Fire Department, later becoming the vice president of his family's small business. In 2012, he was elected to the North Dakota State Senate, where he served for 6 years. Additionally, he was elected as chairman of the North Dakota Republican Party in 2015, which was a position he held until his election to the U.S. Congress. Throughout his career in politics, Congressman Armstrong has been a strong advocate for North Dakota and the role in strengthening our nation's economy and national security. He truly knows what we must invest in all the tools of national power and keep America safe, secure, and prosperous. Congressman Armstrong, we are grateful to you for joining us today. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on how we can strengthen Americans' global leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our distinguished panel.
All right. Good morning, everyone, again. It's really great to be up on this stage with, as we heard, true leaders from across the country and right here in North Dakota. I think these gentlemen have combined experience over multiple lifetimes of just public service to our country, and so I'm really honored to have this conversation with you all today. And I want to jump right in something we've kind of been already talking about food security around the world, as we know is important. Just to set the scene that 1 in 4 countries around the world have their populations facing hunger, and 1 in 3 people on our planet are facing malnutrition, which is really remarkable to think about, that 1 in 3 people aren't getting the food they need. I want to jump right in with Congressman Armstrong and talk about farmers, which of course are a huge part of a state here in North Dakota. North Dakota is the largest producer of wheat here in the United States, and as we said, billions of dollars worth of exports. So I want to jump right in and ask you, how do our international programs that we work on support farmers and folks right here in North Dakota?
Well, we produce a lot of things we don't consume here, and that is just the fact of being an ag and energy state. And it's also probably the most significant soft power influence the United States has. So we talk about food security, we talk about exports, we talk about all of those things. It's also one of the 3 tiers of what we deal with in the ongoing conflict with China. But I mean, North Dakota is one of the top ag producers in 35, 40 different crops. And those crops are needed not just here, not just in New York, not just in California, but they're needed all across the world. And it is essentially one of the ways in which we continue to have build relationships with developing countries. The simple fact of the matter is, and we'll talk about, I'm sure, a little bit more about this, but you need cheap, reliable food, you need cheap, reliable energy. Those are the 2 things every single developing country all over the world is looking for. Those are 2 things the United States is really good at providing, and they're 2 things that North Dakota is a big reason the United States is good at providing them.
Right, I think that's true. And I think also when you talked about, basic things that people need, when we talked about, earlier when 1 in 3 people are facing malnutrition, if people don't have, like you said, basic necessities, food, shelter, and water, their conflict's going to arise. Folks are going to, hopefully no one in this room has experienced that, but if people don't have enough food to eat, they're going to do anything they can to provide for their family, right? And I think, General Fay, you've served in combat zones around the world, you've served in uniform, and you've kind of seen this firsthand of how, when America shows up, how it impacts folks. So I think there's a really important context and connection between national security and the food security. If you want to maybe talk about that a little bit with us.
Sure, and I'll take 10 seconds first to say thank you. As a service member who lived in the great state of North Dakota twice, only the best come north. I did it twice, so our family is twice as good. I just want to say thank you on behalf of myself, my family, and every service member, the way that you just embrace us and treat us, so thank you for that. But I think of this as a 3-legged stool, so to speak. You've got prosperity, security, stability. If you don't have all 3 of those things, the stool cannot stand. And when it comes to stability, food, water, population growth are totally interrelated. So when I would wake up every morning and look around the world and wonder where we were going to have issues with stability, food, water, population growth, where those 3 things overlap, where you got rapid population growth, you have food insecurity, you have water issues, there's going to be conflict. And where there's conflict, obviously, if you can get in front of that, if you can make small investments ahead of that, versus turning to the military as the last instrument of national power that you want to use to employ, it's very expensive and blood and treasure. That's wise, and that's kind of how I would frame that discussion.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think also, when we talk about what you said, just kind of those 3 pillars about stability around the world, I know you served in Africa and Europe as well, but just hearing those experiences as well is just something that, as we've talked as well, to hear about how this is so important. And I really think that, as someone, Governor Schaefer, you've served here in state government as a leader of this state, but also as a leader in Washington as the Secretary of Agriculture under President Bush. How should we be thinking about this global crisis, food insecurity, today, and what role does specifically North Dakota have in that?
Well, it's interesting. When we had the food crisis in 2008, we had a big food summit in Rome. And I'm walking around all over the place, and people are saying, the United States needs to do more. The United States needs to do more. And I'm going, The United States citizens provide 50% of the food aid in the world every year. And we don't even know it. I mean, our citizens don't even know it, but we're doing it. And so I'm going, how can we do more? We already do half of it, and everybody else does the rest. And it was interesting. I was talking to the person at the UN, the head of the program, and I said, I don't get it. She said, you know, if you have 2 kids and one is getting C's in grades and the other one's getting A's in grades, which one do you expect more from? And I said, okay, so we're the A team here, and we have to step up to the deal. Obviously, as you mentioned, North Dakota produces crops, but more than crops, we produce machinery, systems, knowledge, know-how. And I think it's been my experience around the globe when hungry people provide unstable governments, the best thing to do is to feed them. And not only do we have in the United States of America and from North Dakota need to export our products, but we have to export our machinery, our equipment, our knowledge, our extension services, animal husbandry, forestry, I mean, you know, the things that make people in their countries live, raise their families. If you get away from the professors in the universities and the elected officials or the appointed officials, the people, you know, are what it's all about. And it's been my experience that the people are out there, they want to raise their families, they want to do a good job, they want to support their community, and importantly, they really appreciate America. And we need to continue that effort.
Yeah, and I think that's true also talking about appreciating America, and we talked about when stability coming from a lack of hunger, and that's kind of the next point I wanted to touch on, is I feel like when we turn on the news now or open the newspaper every day, it's, you know, we're at a pivotal moment, today is a crisis, the world's ending every single day. But I think that we're in a really interesting time right now. When we touched on African instability, I think there's been 7 coups in Africa in the past 2 years alone, in 7 countries going through, regime change. I think, but today when we talk about what America is facing, we've got, of course, number one, as the Congressman just said, strategic competition with the People's Republic of China is number one, I think, for all of us, or maybe it should be number one for all of us. But it's also about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and how that's had an effect on the global economy, not just from food, but for everything, energy prices, inflation that we've seen. And also economic uncertainty that we're facing as well. For example, today it was just announced that China's currency has fallen to its lowest point in almost 2 decades. And again, like I said, with inflation and supply chain problems that we faced. But I really want to focus on China because, Congressman, you've been a real leader on how America should deal with China. And a lot of it, comes around to competition. And one area where the Chinese are leading is in their diplomatic presence. They don't just have more embassies than us now. They've got, they're showing up in international organizations. They're making Xi Jinping's vision for the world very clear in the UN and other organizations. They've supported Russia in its invasion of Ukraine. So that all sounds like 10,000-foot level, but we're sitting here in Fargo, right? So what does the competition with China look like for folks here in North Dakota and across the country is my question for you. Just a simple, easy
Well, the short version is we want to hold China accountable, and we still want to sell them soybeans.
Right.
I mean, if you want the short version in Fargo, North Dakota, that is the truth. China has a demographic problem. I mean, anybody out here and anybody in business here is dealing with a workforce shortage. We have a demographic problem in the United States. It's multiplied by plaid in China. The one thing China can't do is feed its own population. Right. But I'll take you really close to home before we go to Africa, before we go to anybody else. I'm looking at you, Yana. What's the richest country per capita in the world? Oh, Norway? What's going to be the richest country per capita in the world within 3 years? No, Guyana. Any of you ever heard of Guyana? It's between Suriname and Venezuela. Exxon and Hess have found an offshore oil display that's going to fundamentally change the country. 800,000 people, English speaking, want to have a relationship with the United States. We can't get somebody from commerce in the U.S. Embassy down there. We cannot get them. Right. They don't need a trade agreement. They have oil. What they need is a loan. You know what the Ex-Im Bank wants before they go above their $100 million threshold? They want an ESG score. Guess who built Guyana's airport? China. Guess who was the first country to recognize Guyana's independence in 1966? China. This is in our basement. This is the old school Monroe Doctrine stuff. That oil is getting developed. They were very specific. They tried to keep China out of this oil play. You know what China did? Bought a Canadian oil company. So they own 26% of the play. These are real world things going on. And the reason I bring it up, because in DC, China is not a partisan issue. The fight about China in DC is whether China is our biggest strategic adversary over the next 100 years, or whether they are the existential threat, which would make us make decisions that are temporarily harmful because we have to deal with China. And we are on the same page as Democrats and Republicans in almost every single one of the issues, except there's a huge gorilla in the room, and it's climate. And it's climate. And you cannot deal with China until you deal with the United States climate policies. And we have to start having those real conversations. Because the reason we don't have a commerce person in the embassy in Guyana is only one reason. It's because the resource is oil. And nothing scales up like oil or natural gas or energy, and they're going to develop it. Chevron is one of 3 people in the play in Venezuela. The other 2 are Iran and China. Now, I'm not always a big fan of the big 5 oil companies. I've fought with them a lot in my personal life and my political life. But I think everybody in this room recognizes that if somebody's going to develop Venezuelan oil, we'd prefer it's a United States company versus 2 of our biggest strategic adversaries. And instead, we put a myopic viewpoint over it and would say, we're going to race and we're going to do all of these different things. But the Venezuelan people and the Guyanese people are going to develop this resource, and they're going to do it without the United States help or with the United States help. So we should get more realistic about what these relationships look like. And that goes for both sides, by the way. I spend a lot of time doing energy literacy with Republicans in Congress because they want to talk about the Permian and the Bakken and offshore, and I am obviously a huge fan of that. It's my hometown, it's my family's business. But oil is global, and you could speak to it much more than I could, but you have an Iraqi problem with the Kurds, and that's actually a WTO fight with the Turkish pipeline. But if the Kurds lose their very, very small footing over there, we lose an incredible ally, and guess who replaces them? Iran. So how do we deal with China? We have to start looking at everything, and I think for the most part, in a really dysfunctional time in DC, we do China pretty well. I mean, Speaker Pelosi is one of the biggest China hawks of the last 30 years. The problem is it's the climate portion of that which everybody is setting to the side because we can't come to any consensus on climate, but you cannot set it to the side because China has 40% of the processed lithium in the world. I mean, these are real conversations that have to move forward, and we shouldn't set it to the side because we can't get forward the way we need to without having that conversation.
I think that's really important. And also, it's great to hear, because again, you've been a champion here and working, like you said, across the aisle, that some issues have to rise kind of above the day-to-day dysfunction to, as you said, the threats that we're facing. And so, but you talked a lot about, I just want to follow up with you for a second, if you don't mind, about, Guyana, our backyard, all these different countries. When you're, as a member of Congress, when you're talking to folks in Washington, and they're talking about China, is the number one thing they're talking about Taiwan? What is their number one issue when it comes to China when it's around the world?
Well, the one publicly is obviously Taiwan, and one of the single biggest reason outside of the democracy and the strategic national interest is microchips. The one we don't talk enough about, and the reason why we're in a pause in whatever you want to call this, whether it's a cold conflict or where we're at, is medicine. And China can't feed itself, and if they cut off our access to medicine, we have a real problem, and we have it immediately. So you've got Taiwan, and you've got that portion of it, and the microchips and the critical minerals. You have China, which has a real problem with calories, and you have the United States, which over the course of the last 60 years has become wholly dependent on China for the vast majority of medicines that we need every single day. So that's where you have those 3 things, and that's why onshoring is important, work with India is important, all of those things are important, but even when we outsource the manufacture of medicine to India, the raw product still comes from China. Same thing with the CHIPS Act. We're going to start producing chips in the United States, but we have done nothing to talk about where we're going to get the critical minerals to do that. And to be clear, we're not going to mine them here in time. And anybody who says we are is not being honest with you. It doesn't matter if it's lithium, cobalt. We have them. We have the ability to do it, but historically, we've never been good at it. If you go to South America, the 2 people who run the mines are Canadians and Chinese. We have to be more realistic about this, and I just spent 5 days in Norway. We should be talking about friend-shoring critical minerals, because anything else is a pipe dream. We won't have a permit for a lithium mine in the next 10 years. That's just the reality of the current environment of the regulatory framework of Washington, D.C. but we're going to need those products, and we should be incentivizing our friends and our allies, whether it's Canada, whether it's Norway, whether it's our friends in South America, to produce these products so we don't rely so heavily on China.
I think that's great, and that's a segue because I wanted to ask the general about this, about ally shoring, or friend shoring, but also just our strategic partnerships in general, right? Because I think maybe one lesson we've learned in the past decade or so is that even though America is the strongest country in the world, we really do still need our allies and friends around the world, and it's not just all of the feel-good stuff like human rights and democracy, but it also has a critical interest for us here as well. And I know because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we've seen this come up a lot as well. You were the commander of the U.S. Air Force in Europe and Africa, and so you've probably worked with these partners around the world for decades. So, just building off what the congressman was saying, why is it so important that we're showing up for our allies, investing and engaging with them?
Sure, and just to clarify, I was a deputy commander in Europe, so if my 4-star boss is watching,
you can blame me.
My phone's going to ring while we're sitting here,
Right.
right? So, but just real quick to follow up on the China question. One of the things, I'm very simple, I take a look at the world, what you say and what you do. What have they said? China has been very clear that they intend to supplant us in every aspect of leadership across the globe. Remake the international order, change laws, rules, everything that we respect. And what have they done? You can talk about the man-made features, islands they have built across South China Sea. You can talk about the confrontation every single day they have with our allies and partners in the region. You can talk about their Belt and Road Initiative to debt trap people all across the globe by lending them money they know they can't pay back, so now they are the owner of that port, of that airport, of that critical energy infrastructure. They have been very clear of their intent. They are very clear about their military buildup, which is across all aspects of the military at a speed that you have heard senior leaders talk about, including on the nuclear side of the house. So all aspects, what they say, what they do. That tells me everything I need to know about what I need to be thinking about and what I need to be doing to effectively deter them. And the number one thing I can do is make sure that I'm shoring up those alliances and partnerships you just asked about. When we woke up every morning when I was in Germany, I had my NATO allies side by side with me 24/7, 365. And it's all about not just shared interest, which is transactional, but shared values. We believe in the same things. So it is so easy to have that. What do China and Russia not have? Allies and partners, unless you count Iran and North Korea and Belarus. That's fine. So we have allies and partners across the globe. And what does that do? That enables us, honestly, to be able to deter. And deter is the goal, right? When Russia and China do the calculus every single morning, when Xi wakes up, when Putin wakes up every single morning, they look, they measure who they're facing, and with allies and partners, hopefully the decision is not today, because they're strong, they're united, they're linked together. Whether that's just a pure numbers issue, whether it's a quality issue, because we train, we work with our allies and partners every day, or whether it is just that the calculus that they have to do. So it is one of our strategic advantages, and we all understand what that means. It is just something that we have that is so powerful that the adversary is never going to be able to replicate. So I think, honestly, that is something that I want to say thank you to our diplomats, because they make that happen every single day by living in tough places, decade after decade, working downrange, shoring up those alliances and partnerships, so that when I do engage with my counterparts in a NATO setting or an alliance or a partnership, that hard work has already been done.
Right. I think it's really important to think about, too, as you said, that we kind of have, built-in friends with our values, right, of who we are as a country. And I think if you ask, maybe folks as, some of the countries the Congressman was talking about, who they'd rather do business with. You said they tried to keep the Chinese out. You said in Guyana, for example, folks want to have America as the leader, and I think it's important that we're showing up. And that just brings the question off the top of my head, if you don't mind, Governor. I want to ask you this as well. As you, like you said, when you were in Rome, when you were representing the United States around the world in our agriculture, and you said that as a Secretary of Agriculture, and folks were asking you, where is America, where is America? And you were talking about, we're already providing 50% of the aid. How do you think that we can, without maybe even having to produce more, how do we tell the world kind of what America's here for, and that we are here, we're showing up, and we're engaged?
Well, I think, that's let me get into the question with a couple of other issues. One is I would be remiss not to send greetings from Congressman Pomeroy, the co-chair of the North Dakota USGLC. I'm visited with him, and he wants me to send his greetings and also his appreciation for your involvement in the USGLC as well. So good morning from Earl Pomeroy. But I kind of want to weave this together, and I'll try to be short. but Congressman Kelly Armstrong was talking about Guyana and oil. And I need to give you a perspective of the broader picture of the problem that can create. When we were negotiating the Central America Free Trade Agreement, Venezuela was going country by country in front of us and saying, we will contract with you for low-cost oil, below market price oil for 10 years if you follow our policies and our direction and not get involved with the United States of America. So the influence that goes on with the oil, that takes place, affects us in many, many areas, and certainly affected us in our ability to export North Dakota products and other products into those countries because of the way they used oil as a wedge in to create policy and direct those countries' efforts. So now we got China getting involved in Guyana, and the threat is they can do the same thing. Now we have the biggest issue in China, in my opinion, in the food area, is they have made themselves self-sufficient in grains, or in wheat specifically. So that leaves them with corn and soybeans. Now the average size of a farm, on a corn farm in China, is 2 mu's. A mu is 6/10 of an acre. That's the average size of a corn farm. And they're literally poking sticks in the ground and dumping seeds in to grow corn. So we have, huge opportunity with corn. And as Kelly mentioned, soybeans, we want to sell the soybeans but, so in my opinion, we have to get involved, the United States of America has to get involved in the diplomatic effort of pointing out our food security, our ability to help people eat, but more important, our ability to help people develop their communities, their families, because that's what brings together the program. Nobody knows. You walk out here in the lobby and ask the first 10 people you see how much food aid in the United States of America sends across the world. Nobody knows that. Why? Why is that? We should know that. The U.S. government spends plenty of money telling us what to do and how to do it. Why aren't they spending the money telling us what we are doing that is making a difference in the world? I think that's a huge, strong issue. And, the other reality is the more that we engage. Now, China today is the bad guy. There's a lot of issues going around, and especially in the media, about how awful they are. But in my opinion, engaging with the people in the street, on the farms, in the ranches, are really what spreads the word of what the United States of America is capable of. We need to do more of that. We need to have, during the Iraq War, we had the provincial reconstruction teams, that went in. We need to be doing that, not only supporting, extension for farmers, but, secure electricity delivery, storage facilities, transportation facilities. We need to get people in the street, on the farms and ranches, working, supporting their families, building their communities. That's where the strength of the United States of America lies.
Right. Congressman.
Just a side point, you said very few people know that we produce that we provide 50% of the aid, and most people think that foreign aid is like 25% of the U.S. budget, not less than 1%. So you have that going out. We don't know what we're doing in the world, and we think we're spending way more of our money here than we actually are.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the perfect articulation, Congressman, because as you said, when you were asking people what's it worth, and people always say, why are we spending half our budget abroad? And it's truly, that's not what's happening.
So it's up to USGLC to be spreading the message. Right?
Exactly, that's why we're here today. And I want to touch on one thing, and just more of a general economic standpoint. As we said, most of consumers around the world are around the world. They're not in the United States. 95% of folks consuming are around the world. But Congress, and I think what we've seen is that the global economy is so interconnected now with this war in Ukraine. I mean, let's be really transparent. A lot of Americans couldn't put Ukraine on a map back before a couple of years ago, and we didn't realize how much food came from Ukraine or how interconnected the global economy really was. But Congressman, you've been a real leader on explaining to folks and talking to folks about why we're helping Ukraine. And I'd love if you could share a little bit with us here and why we should continue to support those folks from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think, and I'll talk about what I think the real political problem is, but 35%, we do wheat really well in North Dakota. 35% of the world's exportable wheat comes from the Donbass region of the Ukraine. 35%. Right now, they're bombing it, trying to keep it from going out. Talk about China being sufficient in grains. What does that do to world wheat prices? What does that do to China's space? Also, regardless of how you feel about any of this, if there are hunger riots in 25 countries in Northern Africa, it's going to cost the United States more than $100 billion. If it doesn't, we're going to completely cede that area to the Chinese Communist Party. But we don't talk about that. We're not even talking about it now. The last big funding bill for the Ukraine ended up in an omnibus package. It came out of the Speaker's lobby at midnight. It was voted on at noon the next day. Doesn't matter if you're watching CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, you're not getting enough in a 7-minute news clip about it. We have sensationalized this. We have lionized a lot of this. There's a real strategic reason why we should be engaged in this. But there's a real political reason why we should debate this on the floor of the United States House, and we should actually talk to our voters and talk to people about why this is important, instead of shoving it into must-pass bills and only using talking points from people. Both sides of the aisle do this, and then moving it forward. I think the American people are smart enough to recognize that if we can take Vladimir Putin off the board without having one U.S. soldier shot at, that's a pretty big win. I think people are smart enough to recognize that China is watching exactly what's going on, say nothing of Tbilisi, Georgia, and Poland, and all of the other countries over there. But they're only smart enough to hear it if you talk to them about it. It's okay to have a tough conversation, and it's not a binary conversation. There are real reasons why we should be engaged, and there are also real reasons why we should put more constraints on the money we're spending. They just fired like 3 administration officials for grafting money. This happened last week. That's US aid dollars that isn't getting to soldiers on the front line of the Ukraine because somebody in the Ukrainian administration is stealing it. That doesn't mean we shouldn't provide more funding, but we should have a cogent plan, and we should stand up and explain it to people. And then if people disagree with you, they disagree with you. That's kind of the cost of doing business in politics. But this is a serious issue, and it's serious much more so than just where it is on a map. Because where it is on a map is actually pretty strategic.
Yeah, can I just follow up on the sub-Saharan Africa development? I think one of the real issues there is the EU, the European Union, has restrictions for African countries shipping products to the EU that are generated or come from the United States of America. So we've got work to do with the EU, especially with GMO products.
Which is what China's using to build.
Exactly.
They're stealing our egg tech and doing it.
Exactly. So, so it's important, and I'll give you this example. So as we work to develop U.S. generated products in South Africa, in Burkina Faso, and in Tanzania, they've said, well, the heck with the EU, we've got to feed our own people. And so we've got to raise up. So we had 3 countries that were starting to break the EU hold on U.S. generated exports to EU. Burkina Faso had a coup.
Right.
So the whole issue got sidelined or whatever. And my point is, we need to support these governments. We need the progressive folks that are out there, the people that are willing to stand up to outside of country pressures to develop their own communities and their own people. The United States needs to be in there supporting them, and we aren't.
Right. I think that's really true. And I think also the showing up is just half the battle to getting folks. You said all the regulation that folks are dealing with. Just showing up and being on the playing field is half the struggle to get folks there as well. And I want also, Governor, I just wanted to go back to your thoughts on China here for a second. we've talked a lot about competition, 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 but as, folks were saying, we provide, China needs American grain and also its exports like wheat from North Dakota as well. So we have to, how can we think about, if you're an American business or you're telling an American business, how can we try to navigate this situation? And maybe if you could maybe end on a positive note here and see if there's any opportunities for cooperation.
Listen, every farmer you talk to in North Dakota and across the region says, why would we want to develop other people's production and take it away from our own exports? And there's one answer for that. The growth in population with declining yields across the world is crossing over, and we're not being able to provide the nutrition and the products that we need for people in the world. As I said earlier, hungry people make unstable governments. Right. That's a bad trajectory that we're on. And we have to be very aware of how you do that. And the answer to the North Dakota farmer and others is with the growth in population and declining yields across the world, there's plenty of room for our exports as well as helping us develop other countries' production. And it's just like the 1% budget. People have no idea of the need of nutrition across this world. And there's plenty of room for us to do both.
Definitely. I think so. And I think also, I wanted to talk on that when we send just this small investment in general. This is just a question that came from me, so sorry for putting you on the spot here. But when we've talked with lawmakers in Congress and leaders as well, sometimes it's just, one American official at the embassy who's doing the economic work in a country. When you've been serving abroad, how have you kind of interacted with those State Department folks and seen how they've been, active on the ground to advance our interests?
So one of the most amazing opportunities I've had is I've been able to be stationed in embassies twice in my career, once in Argentina, once in Iraq. And so I got to see firsthand the great work that they are doing there. And you're right, and it's oftentimes it's very thin. But one of the things that many people in the room may not be aware of is the absolute side-by-side linked arms that we are with our State Department colleagues. On our staffs, we have an ambassador. So when I'm the Deputy Commander of U.S. Air Forces Europe, an ambassador's on the right, my commander's on the left, the ambassador's on my right, and we work together every single day. When I'm on the headquarters air staff in the Pentagon, Washington, D.C., we have an ambassador that works with me every single day. So that relationship, that mutual support, the understanding of how we can work together as a team is absolutely essential in the national, kind of security realm. And again, not a lot of folks are aware of how close that relationship is, and I just wanted to highlight that.
No, I appreciate that. I think that's really important. And I think also, as we have a couple more minutes here, I just want to think about it, and while as you wrap up, when we've talked a lot about China, we've mentioned Russia, Ukraine, we talked about all these different global crises, and we've talked about it here in North Dakota as well. But I want to end on, like I said, we've talked about some depressing things, quite frankly. So if we end on a looking to the future in a more positive note, over the past couple of years, USGLC has been asking folks, what's it worth? Why are we doing this? Why are we showing up around the world? What's international engagement for? So in each of your own words, I'd like to kind of ask you, what's it worth for us as a country? And what's it worth for folks here, again, and to try to just expand on what we've been talking about of why America needs to show up and be present around the world. And maybe we start with my friend, Congressman Armstrong.
I was 13 when the Berlin Wall came down. I was 13, I was a seventh grader. Every generation younger than me has witnessed a world outside of a Cold War, outside of all of those different issues. The world doesn't do well when the United States shrinks from it. And that has been proven through World War I, World War II, all the way across. Because we have the greatest governing documents in the history of the world. We still are, for all our problems and all our fighting, the U.S. Capitol building is that beacon of light on the hill. And we are way better at exerting our influence through economic means and other soft power than we ever are in nation building in a uniform. So that's what it's worth. Because otherwise, what you are saying about conflict and hunger and all of that, we're going to have to make choices. We're going to have to recede from the world, or we're going to have to put our sons and daughters in uniform, boots on the ground in places where they're getting shot at and killed. So by investing 1% of the United States budget in this and doing it better and doing it in a way that actually influences, and we have to, We also have to recognize that the theft and the graft and those things is not the norm, but that's what's going to get the headlines, and we have to do everything we can to stop it because of the world and the way we consume media now. But the simple reason is we have a really great story to tell, and we should tell it, because when people listen to it, they want to have what we have, and that makes the world a better place.
I think that's right on the nose. And General, your thoughts?
Hey, I'm just going to start out and say we are far better than we think we are. A lot of times we get caught up in what's going on inside our own house, and we don't look out our front window. When you have traveled the world, when you have seen how amazing, what a positive influence we are, everywhere you go, it is just honestly a good reminder. And for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to get overseas and kind of re-blue yourself, remake yourself, remember why we are the greatest nation in the world, just ask that you do that. The second thing I would just add on there is it is really simple sometimes to understand in your own house trade-offs, right? You have to pay the electric bill, you have to pay the water bill. You don't have an argument at the kitchen table about do we pay one or the other, right? You have to pay both bills or the house doesn't function. I sometimes, when we have this discussion, I get asked questions about why would we make this 1% investment, we could do something else. I remind folks that if you own a house, or in my case, when I was running an Air Force base, you have to invest in preventive maintenance of that facility, of that house. If you don't, replace your roof. If you don't maintain your air conditioner, you are going to get to a place where you get to what they call catastrophic failure, where the facility fails. It is far more expensive then to replace a facility that was catastrophically failing than if you had just done the preventative maintenance and made that small investment every single step of the way. It's exactly the same in the international security environment. You have to make those small investments, do that preventative maintenance, ensure that it doesn't go high and right, and we end up in the military realm, because the blood and treasure of our sons and daughters is the most precious thing we have. And the last thing you want is, because you didn't make a small investment, that you send someone like me to knock on the door at 2 o'clock in the morning and bring bad news. Way worth the investment.
It's really powerful. Thank you, General. And Governor, if you want to close this out.
Okay, well, I have a couple of things. First of all, I've been on a couple of panels with Congressman Kelly Armstrong, and always find him to be knowledgeable and studious and clear about his answers and his direction. Every time I've asked him personally, why did you vote this way, or how come you're doing that, whether I agreed with him or not, I got a thoughtful, clear, well thought out, well presented answer, and believed it. And the reason I'm saying that is I think he's demonstrated again today. Former President Trump was snotty one day and didn't like a vote that Kelly Armstrong took, and so he said, well, we should go out and primary him. And my point is, he needs our support. And so I urge you all to support Congressman Kelly Armstrong as he comes up for the election next year. The other issue, I think, is, you know, if I boil this all down, all the statistics and all the military effort and all the food and all the things that go on, I think the presence of the United States of America in communities across this world is what makes a difference. It's the presence. It's people people with people. It's, you know, when we're out there, we go into their homes. We suffer with them over a funeral. We enjoy with them over a wedding. We you know, embrace them with our culture and our values and our character. And when you have that in a home, you have peace in that home. And when you have peace in that home, you have peace in a community. And certainly when you have peace in a community, you have peace in the country.
Right.
And you can have peace in the world. And that's through America's culture, values, character that we get with interacting with people, and we need to do more of that.
I think that's a great ending note for us. And it's just been also a pleasure, as you said, not just the Congressman, but all three of you, for your really thoughtful and articulate way of explaining this to us today and being with us. So if we could give it up a big round of applause for our panel. It's been really an honor. It's been an honor to be here with you all, and we're going to stay seated here for a second, and I'm going to welcome my colleague, Zane Franciscato, who covers USGLC's work here in North Dakota and across this part of the country to close us out here.
Thank you, Nazar, and everyone, thank you so much for being here this morning. I know 8 a.m. events are a little rough to get to some days, but we appreciate you spending some time with us here this morning. As Nazar said, my name is Zane. I am the one who sent all the emails for this morning's event. Thank you so much for letting me spam your inbox the last few weeks, but as you can see, what a great opportunity and conversation this morning. Truly the best part of my job is getting to travel around the country and meet with leaders much like yourselves. Today's kind of a full circle moment for me professionally. When I started with USGLC in 2021, the first 3 people I spoke to in our advisory committee network were from North Dakota. That was Stan, Drew, and Ed up here. And so, it's really full circle moment. And every time I come to the state or talk to folks, North Dakota continues to have a special place in my heart, and I can see the great things going on here. So great job in preserving a great state. I would like to thank Congressman Armstrong, Lieutenant General Fay, Secretary Schaefer, Kylie, Drew, and all the members of our advisory committee for being here today and for your leadership. And everyone else who joined us, thank you again for being here. Here at USGLC, we believe that when members of your congressional delegation support American-led development and diplomacy programs, it's important to thank them. Highlight it in your local paper, call into your local radio station, and share the message with your family and friends. Because again, these issues aren't talked about enough, and anytime they are highlighted, we want you to continue to highlight that. Your continued engagement to show why America's global leadership matters to North Dakota is crucial. On that note, I hope you all stay in touch. We are constantly looking to grow members of our advisory committee. I know there's a lot of new faces in this room. If you're interested in joining, please talk to me. Happy to have you. Otherwise, continue to opt in for updates from our coalition. We travel around the country a lot, hosting a lot of these opportunities, and each conversation was just as impactful as the one here this morning. By being here today, you are a part of an important group of local leaders around the country who have the ability to make an impact. That brings me to this. On June 17th and 18th next year in Washington, D.C., we're hosting our Global Impact Forum. This is a 2-day event where we will expose you to several exciting speakers, networking opportunities, and a Hill Day visit with your members of Congress on Capitol Hill. I know there's a couple in the room who have attended our Global Impact Forum in the past, and thank you for going. Next year, I'm hoping to have 5 North Dakotans attend, so please help me get to that. Again, thank you all for your support, your passion, and your voice. Because of leaders like yourselves all across the country, America remains the leading force of good in the world. With that, thank you so much.